Hello and welcome to the Internet Marketing for Schools podcast. My name is Brendan Schneider, and this is the podcast dedicated to inbound marketing, social media, and branding for schools. My goal is to help you harness the power of the internet to market your school effectively using inbound marketing, content marketing, email, and social media in order to achieve your enrollment goals. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to episode 9 of the Internet Marketing for Schools podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Schneider. Today's guest is Chuck Will from Chuck's Corner, and it's a little bittersweet for me that the first time I get to have an in-depth conversation with Chuck about Chuck's Corner is also really signifying the end of his blog. So I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. You're going to get to hear Chuck talk about the blog in his words, kind of the beginning, the middle, the end. So enough about me. Let's jump right into the interview. I hope you enjoy it. So who are you and what do you do?
I'm Chuck Will. I'm Director of Communication at Proctor and author of Chuck's Corner.
Great. Chuck, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for quite some time. In this era of full disclosure, I want to let everybody know that Chuck is another one of my social media friends. We've never met, and I hope that we can remedy that someday soon. This interview is also a little bittersweet, knowing that this month you will close what has to be the oldest and arguably best-known education blog out there, Chuck's Corner. So let me get into the questions. A very knowledgeable Michael Stoner has observed that you began blogging before the term blogging existed. How is that possible?
Yeah, it's hard to go back to 1998. I mean, our web presence was so primitive in those days. All I was looking for was to be able to caption photographs. The stars were aligned in a number of ways. We had certain talent in the office, and we also had on our alumni association the founder of Whipple Hill, who had not yet determined that he was going to go with prep schools or independent schools as his niche. Mm-hmm. But Travis Warren was in the room, an alumnus who I had admitted when I was director of admission, one of my better decisions.
Or mistakes.
Yeah. And I was saying, Travis, can we make a website that will be simply an open window into the school? Can we just let people see what's happening? Can I, for example, caption photographs, which in those days was considered to be quite a lot of sizzle? And he said, you can not only caption photographs, you could write stories. We can set it up that you could write stories and populate them with photographs. This was a complete skunkworks operation. It was way underneath the radar. No administrator was in the room. No trustee or headmaster knew anything about this. And they went back to Whipple Hill and came back with something called Chuck's Corner on the website, buried in the alumni corner of the page, of the site. And I just really ran with it from the very beginning. I was excited and was given a little, primitive digital camera. And got to work. I think it was a great advantage to start before the concept of blogging existed. I think that today, if someone handed me permission to do this and said, we want great content, I might be intimidated. But it was very organic, and as I said, the stars were aligned, and the rest is history.
So did Chuck's Corner start with a mission?
It did start with a mission, but I don't think that I was aware of it. It occurred to me after I started. The site was buried in the alumni section of a very primitive web presence, and I had already been at the school, even in those days, for 25 years. So I was thinking, I know these people. I know who I'm writing for, these alumni. And so my mission was to sort of amuse them and entertain them with my wanderings around campus with my visuals from this digital camera, and to write about an adult interacting with teenagers. And that was it. It was really very organic and primitive.
How was it received at first? What did people think of it?
Well, within the alumni population, And within the student body, it was somewhat sensational. But it's surprising how slow the administration and the Board of Trustees were to recognize it was even happening. As I said, it was really, it was under the radar screen. By the time it became a public conversation at the trustee level, we had elevated its presence out of alumni and made it much more present on the front page of the school site. A little controversial because I'll tell you the truth, writing to alumni, I chose this voice at the beginning that was really pretty edgy.
Okay.
I wanted to, as I said, it wasn't just to inform people, but to really entertain them. Mm-hmm. And that's a ratio of information versus entertainment that I think a blogger should consider as we go into this, because I've definitely written the book on the entertainment blog, and with some success. But the approach was, here is this adult who's wandering through this campus sort of amused and bemused by adolescents and not really understanding them. And therefore I was able to take this Walter Mitty kind of innocence into my relationships. And the photographs were showing a great deal of affection and kindness. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting shtick at the beginning, and it got me a toehold into this media.
Well, and maybe I have another question that I'll ask later, but when you were talking about kind of your writing and maybe your voice, do you think you were representing your kind of voice, or was it Proctor's, or both?
You know, it was my voice, and I think that there, again, is an advantage that I had early on that few bloggers today will start with. I was given a tremendous amount of permission, and because it was successful early on, the administration has always said, you know, keep rolling with this. But I too have rolled with it and have changed. I'm not writing. I don't lean on text to be edgy now. I will allow the photographs to play that role, and I'm going to get back to that a little bit later. But I would say that certainly at the beginning, I established a voice that was unique, and it was definitely my own, and I also was more opinionated, and I would love to be able to be boldly opinionated again, but as my constituencies grew, I backed a bit away from that. I think it's great, however, to put yourself out there if you want readership.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it's important to make a point or take a stand, and that's how you get people interested. But one of the things you said brings up another question I had. Do you have editorial review, or are you on your own, or was there a version of it that happened that didn't happen? I mean, can you explain that a little bit?
Right. You know, I'm on my own, and I do think that I'm very grateful to the school for giving me the freedom that I've had. I think that I had the fortune of being older and having been here more tenured, I guess you'd say, than any headmaster I worked for. So they continue to play along with this nonsense, and yet having the freedom of not having an editorial review was important in order to put stuff up spontaneously. And I think that one of the power of blogging has to do with its lack of shelf life, because it gives us freedom to be more authentic. And that would not exist if I was constantly answering to a team that was saying, are we sure we're on message here? Are we sure that this could be prettied up a little bit? It is true that without editorial review, a blogger has to welcome the comments, and they're not usually on the page. They usually come end around like an email where someone says, I was upset by what you wrote, or you misspelled tomorrow again, which I have a tendency to do. And you have to welcome feedback like that and just take it and say thank you.
I've had that experience on my blog, and some of it hasn't always been kind, but I agree. You say thank you and make the correction and move on. Now, you talk about, I asked you about the mission. Has your mission changed with the blog over the 15 years that you've done it.
It really has. As I said, I started off entertaining alumni and very quickly became aware that the constituencies that were responding it was growing.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly, within the independent school community, which is fairly conservative, Chuck's Corner got a lot of buzz. And I remember the day, I don't know, what was this? In the mid 2003 or 2004 or 2005, I'm on an airplane with somebody who we're chatting, and he said, Proctor. So you work at Proctor. The only thing I know about that place is Chuck's Corner, and you must know Chuck. And I said, yeah, that guy's crazy. But I was aware that even beyond the independent school industry, was taking off, and I was getting some feedback from Whipple Hill about its success. Yeah. So what that caused, at the same time that I could upload more and more photographs because of simply technology was enabling that, is I began to move more towards letting the photographs communicate the authenticity and use fewer words to tee them up. And I using the photographs more and more as punctuation marks.
Okay.
And I don't know how to describe this, but I fell into a pattern that is fewer and fewer words, simply a basic concept, and more photographs of teenagers being teenagers. And as I did that, I was aware that the audience was becoming more and more Dilbert in a cubicle. And I think that my dream is that, I'm writing to Dilbert in a cubicle because I came out of the admission office.
Yeah.
And when I was in admissions for 15 years, I was director of admission for a long time here. I was aware that we did well, not when we claimed to be academically excellent and to have great student-faculty relationships, because those two qualities are just the entry level. That's the minimum ante for being in the business. Mm-hmm. In order for Proctor to do well as a boarding school, what we needed to do was say, here's what we're absolutely unique at. Well, here's our DNA, our genetic code. Mm-hmm. So it's all about market differentiation. Yeah. And I was reading, The Purple Cow by Seth Godin. Sure, yeah. And I was reading the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and I came upon law number 2, and it absolutely blew me away and said, if you're not number one in a category, create a new category in which you're number one. And in admissions, I had a great deal of success by saying, here's what Proctor does that no other school even tries to do. And I got into this whole mind of thinking, if someone said, what schools do you compete with? I'd say nobody. So when I became a blogger, I eventually moved towards market differentiation. Yeah. And I think that I'm constantly massaging basic concepts that set the school apart. It's not that each post is a story in and of itself, but each post is one page in the long tail. Mm-hmm. And if you read the whole book of that long tail, after a few months or years, you say, now I get it. Now I know what Proctor is. And the real reward for me is when a family that's on a tour, admissions tour, will sometimes ask to be introduced to me. Oh. And sometimes they're saying, I feel that I know I'm experiencing what you wrote about. It works. You prepped us well through the blog. So that for me is a real dream come true. I do think that storytelling is the most important and powerful tool we have for evoking emotion. Mm-hmm. And in the end, you're an admissions person, Brendan, and I'm kind of in the development end. But what we want is people to choose to give us their money, and they're not doing it because of information. Information may tweak their emotion, but it's emotion that causes them to write the check in the end. And I think that blogging is hugely powerful for evoking emotion.
Well, and there's so much that you just talked about, Chuck. I'm just sitting here writing stuff down that hardcore marketing says people do business with or people buy from people they know, like, and trust. So you were able to do that, and I love the stories about wanting to meet you on tour. That's so awesome. But they were able to know, like, and trust Proctor through your lens, which is pretty cool. The question that I had, so I know that, and you brought this up a little bit, you've shifted from words to photos a little more. So was that intentional, or did that just happen kind of organically as you felt the whole process go forward, I guess, your whole blogging process?
I would say it was the latter.
Okay.
The complicating factor, I think that for a blogger out there for a school to listen to me, I think there's a kind of the monkey wrench in the machinery is that I'm not hired by the school to be a blogger. My job is to steward relationships with major donors through customized web pages that are all about their interests. Mm-hmm. So when somebody gives us a gift of $1,000 or more, I'm going to set them up with text and photographs that are all about their interests. So that's why I'm running around the school with a camera all day. Mm-hmm. That's why the school pays me my grand salary. Mm-hmm. And Chuck's Corner always has been a sideshow. It's been a place where I would cordon off certain photographs and say, "Oh, they're probably going to be in Chuck's Corner." Okay. And I'm not sure what question I'm answering anymore, but I guess I'm getting at the fact that it was a side for me. And to ask me again what you wanted to ask.
I was going to say how you've gone from less words to more photos.
Yeah, exactly. The opportunity was there. I think that the image editing for me became more of a joy as I got into Adobe Lightroom, into Lightroom technology. Yeah. I love Lightroom. I love playing with images. And I think I found that I could accomplish more through the photographs, and the fewer words I used, the more impactful. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to broach into another. I know you're going to ask me about content, and I want to
go.
Want to talk about content. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, I think that great content is defined as somebody having a brilliant, evergreen idea that's just going to last and it's going to change the world. It's going to be really cool. And if you have a lot of brilliant ideas, you've got a great blog with a lot of readership. And that's what Seth Godin does. And I turn to Seth Godin for inspirations a lot and credit him, but I'm not that smart. And what I came upon as a formula is very powerful. Is the opposite. It's bottom-up content where I'm using the trivial experience of my walk around the campus 2 or 3 times a day, photographing just teenagers being teenagers, and using the trivial, like, here I was at a biology class, and here's what we were doing, and here I am later at a forestry class that's outdoors, and what is in common here is the nature of the school is to be more experiential in its teaching methodologies. Mm-hmm. Now, that's branding in a manner that you can never do in an admission brochure. Mm-hmm. It's much more powerful because I'm documenting it, and that example I just used was a very easy example, but I could say, here I am on the 9th grade soccer team's bench in a cold rain, and they're losing. And I'm sitting with the boys who aren't playing. Mm-hmm. And that's part of prep school experience that schools don't want to put into their media, mm-hmm. but it perfectly fits into a blog of what you want to do is establish authenticity. Yeah. Now, at the end of the game, coach puts them in, and the other team runs up the score. But I can use that as an example to differentiate my school from the others. Mm-hmm. And a week or 2 later, if I'm at a game, varsity, or it doesn't matter what I'm talking about, if I boast, I've got credibility that you could never have in your newspaper. Credibility is established through this. Here we are sick with the flu. Here's a kid with his thermometer in his mouth, red, bloodshot eyes in the infirmary because we have this flu outbreak. That's a good thing to write about in a blog because you're gaining credibility for the next day.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Let's go a little more down the path of photography.
Yes.
Were you a photographer by Like, have you always been this good at photography? Has this always been a passion of yours? Or did this, you said somebody gave you kind of a primitive camera and you had at it. Where do you fall on
No,
that?
no, as an admissions director, of course, if you're in admissions back in the mid 80s and throughout the 90s, as I was, you were shooting transparencies for slideshows that we took on the road. And that was the extent. I'm still not a photographer, and I cannot talk photography. I don't know how to talk ISO or f-stops or any of that.
Okay.
I shoot on program mode. And I joke with kids all the time. I say, if I take 200 pictures today, 30 or 40 of them will be worth looking at. I love image editing. And I think, I have a lot of artists in my grandparents and all. And I think that that's finally something I've been able to grow into through image editing. It's a wonderful thing to crop a photograph and make it jump into the frame. And in Chuck's Corner, I consistently exaggerate hue so that the colors are a little bit cartoonish.
Okay.
Always blacken, always contrast, always sharpen, and it gives all of the images a look the way a cartoon might. I think of each post as being somewhat of a cartoon strip in a long set of cartoon strips like Calvin and Hobbes.
So do you do that for every photo? So do you, you go take the photo and then you do the image editing. Do you drastically, I guess drastically is not the right word, but you're kind of changing the photo. Do you do that for all your photos?
Yeah, I've never put up a photograph the way I shot it.
Okay.
Everyone has some cropping, everyone.
Okay.
And I do think that that's the first most important thing you do is get rid of the wasted space on the sides. You have to choose what matters.
Yeah.
And then I do like this thing where I jack up the hue. I also cool temperature and make the photo a little blue. It's just something I like. And other those little tricks I think may be signature from my photographs. But I tell the students I'll make your brown eyes blue if you want. I love image editing.
So, any other tips that you can share? Because you've done this for a long time. What are tips?
Yeah, I started with a really superb. Oh no! After the initial, really primitive cameras.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as Nikon came out with the D100.
Yeah.
I had a great time going into the store, and they said, "How much would you like to spend on your camera?" And I knew exactly what I was going to buy. I said, "I'd like to spend $2,000." And they said, "Well, right this way, young man." And so I shot with the Nikon D100 with some fabulous lenses for many years.
Yeah.
But I would never go back to that. A friend of mine introduced me to a Nikon Coolpix P510, and I don't think. This is just one of a lot of different what are called super zoom cameras right now. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter that you get the Coolpix. I mean, they're all fantastic. Yeah. So this has 42 times optical zoom. And I can stand in a classroom at the far end of a classroom and zoom in so that you feel like you're smelling a student's breath. I mean, I can get right into their chin, into their book. And with no need for a flash, I never use a flash when I can avoid it so that you get three-dimensionality out of the image.
Yeah.
And it's just a magical camera. Across campus, I can take photographs and they will be a little bit two-dimensional because of the amount of zoom. But the new generation of small cameras right now are spectacular. And I even shoot with my telephone sometimes and then email myself the photo and deal with it from there.
Yeah, the telephones, the smartphones are pretty good.
It's amazing.
So let's get into post frequency. It seems that you're posting a couple times a week. How do you anticipate your next topic?
That's interesting. I think bloggers are going to tend to fret about topics with that that sort of top-down concept of great content. I would say, if you're smart, you're a school photographer, you might say, okay, Wednesday is the school play. So I'm going to shoot that, and I'm going to write about drama and the arts. And a school play is about the only time I do that. And I've actually know ahead of time I've got a target topic and I'm going to broaden it out to illuminate the greater truth, was how the arts fit in.
Mm-hmm.
But I like being more spontaneous, and this is just something that I'm comfortable with. And before I go any further, I would say to anybody starting as a blogger with a school, you can listen to me, but if I listen to other people, I never would have. It has to be organic, and I think you have to do your own thing, given your own school, given its nature, and given your nature.
Mm-hmm.
So, but pursuant to that, I mean, I like being spontaneous. I'll take a lot of photographs, pretty some up, look at them, and it's been 3 days since I did the last Chuck's Corner. I have this certain sort of existential constipation. I feel it's like, oh my God, I haven't done a Chuck's Corner in 3 days,
Yeah.
and I want to put one. And so I'll look at the images, and if I'm really desperate, I'll turn to Seth Godin's "This Is Seth" blog, and he'll write something that'll stimulate something. But usually, I'll come up with something about, here in these pictures, I'm seeing a theme, and the theme could be anything, but it starts trivial, as I said earlier. Mm-hmm. It's for Proctor, the genetic code comes down to things like a tendency towards experiential modes of teaching and learning. Mm-hmm. Another one would be informality, where faculty-student relationships are egalitarian and there's no seniority at the school. Okay. Another one would be the fact that we're extremely supportive, and if you want to have tutors, you can have tutors. So I'm constantly going back and seeing, where in these images am I going to be able to reinforce this DNA, this genetic code of the school. I think that at a subtle level, I'm constantly branding.
I was going to say, you're branding all the time, and that's brilliant.
There's a consultant, I think his name is Robert Normand, of Turnaround Marketing.
Yeah.
And he did a show. He does a pitch, and after he put it all together, he said, "Chuck, I want you to know that I'm kind of talking about you." And he taught me about what I do, because he took a particular Chuck's Corner where I said, because we've got all these kids in SATs and PSATs, we can't run classes that day, because sophomores and juniors tend to be taking the same classes, and some seniors are taking U.S. history too. We're not class differentiated, and therefore, what are we going to do with ninth graders? We take them for a hike. And my photography is about the hike with the ninth graders. But he said, this text is your branding. You're telling people that you don't differentiate by class. And I never think of branding as having to do with the minutia like that. But I think he's absolutely right. Talk about the details of these are our systems. This is the way we tend to do things. And people are ravenous for that. That's what they want to know. Because it's not in your newsletter, and it's not in your admission brochure.
Well, it's great that you brought up Rob, because Rob and Liza were episode 8, I think it was, at the podcast, and it's kind of eerie that you brought him up, because as you were talking, it reminded me of the conversation I had with Rob and Liza, and how, you're thinking about your next topic and content. You're constantly kind of coming back to that branding and what differentiates Proctor from other schools. So that's fantastic. Do you have, so besides the plays or the artistic performances,
right,
do you have an editorial calendar pushed out at all, or is it really just like an inner alarm clock going off saying, okay, I need another Chuck's Corner?
For me, it is the latter, and I've got this down. I can't tell you how comfortable I am with it, but it's been a very long time, and I keep coming back to images like the stars were aligned for me, and it's just the nature of not only me, but the school. Proctor's kind of an iconoclastic, quirky school that it enjoys being different.
Yeah.
So I had this all kind of teed up somehow, and I think that while I'm going to tell you the truth about that, I don't want to frustrate a professional at another school that is in a different environment. I think that you need to understand, the nature of your school. I really, that's really a key point for me. I think one of the first things I would do if I were starting blogger at a school is sit down with whatever my team is and say, let's brainstorm our genetic code. How are we going to differentiate ourselves so that I know the concepts? And then get off my back. But I'm going to do my best at sort of cultivating this.
Okay.
And I think that was my gift.
Yeah, clearly that was a gift. It's fantastic. But here's the question that comes out of that for me. Could Chuck's Corner have happened at another school, and would it have been as successful?
When I go to conferences, I got a kind of celebrity status. I have a lot of people come up to me and say, "You're the Chuck," and and they'll say. In fact, people in my own office, now that I'm retiring, I've got a lot of things that say "the Chuck" on it, and a lot of love. But
Yeah.
but people have said, we don't have a Chuck at our school, and I said, well, you must have a writer. That's first of all, my talent is writer, but you can the writer a camera and give him permission. It hasn't happened at a lot of schools, and I'm guessing that we're a conservative industry. I think now increasingly with marketing committees, we want to stay on message, and I think that stifles a lot of the skunkworksy part of this that was so creative and so fun.
Yeah.
I still hope that someone could say, "Look, let's take a risk," because the more we take a risk and be personal and human, the more likely we're going to hit a home run.
Yeah, and as I asked the question, I've enjoyed your answer, but I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking you started this after how many years had you been at Proctor? 25?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you knew the school intimately well, which I think put you in a position of strength to tell this story because you knew the place.
And I couch a lot of writing very subtly. I couch it in some institutional memory and history.
Yeah.
And that for students, here's a different dividend. Imagine the impact on students who are really devoted readers. Believe me, they're reading Chuck's Corner. They all, they're saying, "Oh, I want to be on Chuck's." That's what they call it. And but to put stuff in the school's history and say, this was the nature of the school up through the 1950s, and then have their photographs there. That creates an interesting dynamic on campus in terms of them respecting the school and respecting its heritage. And that's been something I'm proud of.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me switch a little bit. So I want to talk about metrics. So one of the things I've written about and talked about is the great thing about the internet is you can measure and kind of see if things are working or not. So, number of readers is one, but are there any other metrics or statistics that you use to track to gauge the success of the blog?
It's all really subjective, and I guess the answer is no. Family weekends are an embarrassing, love fest for me, and I've got a lot of attention from parents. Yeah. I think that I don't know how many families out of the year asked to meet me on an admission visit, but it's dozens, and that's a nice metric.
Yeah.
We just had alumni reunion, and you can imagine what that's like.
Yeah.
I know all but 2 out of the 100 and something people who came back. But, I don't have actual firm metrics, and yet you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing.
Yeah.
It's been a very successful for the school. It's been very successful for admissions, and I think that in a hidden way was always my goal.
Okay, so that's a great segue. You said your target audience initially was alumni, and it was buried under alumni, and it's definitely a marketing admissions piece now. How did that change? Was that intentional? You've kind of already said that was in the back of your mind. I think once admission director, always admission director. But talk to me a little bit about that.
Right. I think that backing up from being kind of on the insider with alumni who I once knew, I quickly backed away from that and said, I want this to resonate with families that have an eighth grader.
Okay.
I want this to work with a family that doesn't yet, for Dilbert, or who might have a child, or doesn't know anything about independent schools. And here's a place where an adult man is having these relationships with teenagers. And that's coming through all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think a hidden concept I've had for a very long time is that if you were to, what's more important to an eighth or ninth grader and his family? How many kids you get into Ivy League colleges, or what percentage of the students at the school seem to be happy and to love the place? I think it's the latter. And that's the card I've played all the time, is that here's a place where the students like the school and they like me. And I'm now 63 years old. Mm-hmm. And for that to happen, that's kind of a cool community. Mm-hmm. And so that was tied into increasing photographs and diminishing text. It would be a really cool challenge for me. I'm probably not going to do it in my last 3 posts, but would have been a cool challenge. Is, can you do a Chuck's Corner with 3 or 4 sentences and 20 photographs? And I would love to do that. But let the photographs tell the story and have the words simply say, and now we're going to this concept, and that's all. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There could be a 4th, Chuck. You might have to. You might have to do one more. So here's a fun question, at least for me. What does your family think of all this? How have they, because you had kids go through Proctor, didn't you?
Yes, my son's 32 and my daughter's 29, and what did they think about it? Yeah. It was all happening while they were here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's an issue. They just always knew me this way, and I also think that Chuck's Corner is an extension of kind of being a quirky. I'm an iconoclast. I like to tear down whatever anybody's worshiping. So if everyone thinks that communications should be in a traditional manner, I've always wanted to fight that. Mm-hmm. And so none of this would be a surprise to them. And so I guess my family, my wife, is always shaking her head and just saying you're nuts. Yeah. But my kids, I hear nothing. They grew up with it. It's part of them. It just means nothing to them.
Yeah. Your wife sounds like my wife. She just shakes her head and she just puts up with me because they're stuck with us now.
You're putting in more hours than I am, Brendan.
I don't know, Chuck. That image editing can take up a lot of time.
No. You're putting in hours. I know it.
I don't do that. So now you're going to retire shortly from Proctor. So the big question I think everybody wants to know is what happens to Chuck's Corner?
Well, it is a personal thing and it's a voice, and I figured out a long time ago I can't hand it off. It would be unfair to hand it off if we even found somebody who wanted to pick it up.
Yeah.
And it has to be put to bed. And I don't know, people have asked, could you keep doing it? But it's all about being around teenagers, and it's very important to me at this point after 38 years to really sever. I want to have a different chapter at the end of for the rest of my life. Yeah. So I'm going to put it to bed, and I just have to figure out, and I'm going to do that.
So how do you end a blog that has over 75,000 readers?
Oh, I was hoping I could ask you that question.
You have more readers than I do, Chuck. Come on, you're famous, man.
No, I've got. So if you're not going to answer that, I've got to ask Travis, because he started the thing. I take inspiration from Bill Watterson. I mentioned earlier the concept of a comic strip, and when Bill Watterson wanted to end Calvin and Hobbes, he did a very elegant thing where he had a penultimate strip that kind of teed up that it was going to end. Mm-hmm. And then he ended it in a beautiful way that was very forward-thinking and very positive and open to the future. And I've got to figure out how I'm going to do that. But as I told you a few minutes ago, I always do it at the last second. So I'll go through some photographs, and probably archival photographs, and figure it out. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that final strip. But I have no idea how to end a blog with all these readers.
I'll make a suggestion, Chuck. I think you should turn the lens onto you.
What does that mean?
Turn it around. Pictures of you.
A selfie?
Selfies or even Chuck throughout the years.
Yeah, I'm not looking as good as I did when I started.
That's okay though, because it's authentic, Chuck. It's the real you.
Here's what blogging can do to you.
Yeah, don't do that then. We want people to blog, and I know I'm starting to get more gray than I had when I started all this stuff. So
I'm sure you look awful.
Now, so what? If you had to do it all over again, or if there was one thing that you would change when you started, maybe there's two questions there, maybe it's the one. What would you do differently, if anything?
Wow.
Sorry, drop that one on you.
You know, I wish I had not pissed off the headmaster with a photograph I put in once. But seriously, you know, I don't have a lot of regrets. It's really been a dream come true. It's been a fun ride. The whole thing. I mean, just being at the school for a very long time. I was 25 years old when I started, and
Wow.
This has been a great ride. And to end up being given the opportunity to be so expressive, and blogging is so much fun. I mean, that's kept me sane, and I'm very grateful to the school and to Travis Warren and a lot of people who made this, gave me the opportunity. But I don't have any regrets. I can't think of anything I'd do differently. No.
Well, I think that's perfect, and I think that's a beautiful way to end the interview, Chuck. You know, I didn't tell you this in the beginning, but when I started SchneiderB, you know, whose blog was I looking at? Well, it was Chuck's Corner. And you know, becoming a friend of Travis, he talks about Chuck's Corner all the time. So, and he's a very, very proud alum of Proctor. So, you know, had to check it out and had to see it. And, you know, I'm doing a little bit different stuff, but huge fan. Chuck, I can't thank you enough for being here. We're looking forward to the final few episodes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brendan. And I look forward to reading your blog on for a very long time.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much fun as I did talking to Chuck. The only regret I have is that I wish I was able to do that in person. I could have talked to Chuck for hours about blogging and photography, and I'm sure there are a bunch of other topics we could have come up with. Now, to end, I'd like to ask a favor. In order to get the word out about this blog, and if you've enjoyed it and feel comfortable doing so, if you could navigate to iTunes and write a review of the show, an honest review of the show. If you think it's good, put it down. If you think it's not great, please put that down, and please give me some feedback on how you think we could make it better. So again, thanks for listening, and until next time.